Black like me. Black like me. Black like me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with my cousin Brandon Cook. As I told you last time, I attended his Uncle John's, my cousin John's funeral in New Orleans and interacted with white relatives, many of whom didn't know that I existed, most of whom had never met me. And so we are just processing that funeral in New Orleans. And I just want you to lean in because part 2 is just as good as part 1. So take a listen and enjoy.
You know, this language that you're wrapping around things, I don't know if we said it, but the malaise is the word I hear. There's this sort of malaise that allows us, especially that allows white folk to externalize the issue rather than internalize it. So rather than doing the internal work of, wait, something's wrong here, this affects me, we are all connected, rather than moving to an internal movement, feeling the trauma, feeling the grief of it. I've experienced this so often. It's an externalization of the problem. All right, the problem's out there with somebody else. Black folk can figure this out. This is really their problem. And I think that contributes to when people are invited to do grief or trauma work around race, the first reaction is that I find in myself sometimes, or that I've certainly seen in other folk, is this guilt. Well, I don't want to be guilty of this. And and it misses the boat, right? Because I've never heard you ask anybody to feel guilty, but like what you did with me is like, hey, wake up. You can be an advocate. Don't go to because I find that in me. I do find this in me that there's I in a lot of places in life I feel more like an expert. Not here, you know. I at all sorts of places. This is a place where I'm aware I don't know what I don't know. And I am afraid of sticking my foot in my mouth or because I've heard other white people say stuff where I kind of, you know, roll my eyes like, oh my gosh, how could you say that? But I don't know if I'm doing that, right? But for you always bypass, you are always so quick to not even touch the guilt conversation.
Right.
And go right to the power and the advocacy. I also think that it's interesting, the word you used, anesthesia, and the idea of waking up, is interesting to me, especially right now, because I'm doing a lot of trauma work and I'm reading a lot of books on trauma. And Peter Levine talks about how the way out of trauma is not to endlessly cry about it or to endlessly talk about it. He says your body needs to discharge the energy of trauma. So someone who is abused didn't know how to stand up for themselves as a child. They had no idea how to advocate for themselves. Well, their nervous system, if they're an adult, their nervous system is still waiting for them to advocate for themselves, to say, no, hell no, this was wrong. You can't do this to my body or whatever. And that's actually to get that response in your body is actually what frees you from trauma. And
wow,
it's incredible. It's been really helpful for me as I process my own trauma, you know, completely unconnected to race, or not directly connected to race. But the idea of, so I love that you said waking up and it's sort of unfreezing and coming out of the anesthesia, because I think that's what it is. It's getting anger in your body as advocacy of something is wrong here. Anger doesn't have to be aggression or violence. I'm thinking of Robert Master's work. Anger is the power of compassion and advocacy. You need anger. And some level, you know, justified anger that makes perfect sense. While your course is entitled that, because we have to get that anger into our bodies. And so the idea of being lulled is like, yeah, we're not going to feel outrage. We're not going to say that this is wrong, because then we might feel anger about it. And to your point, then we might threaten the system. And anyway, so that language is fascinating to me. The idea of unfreezing, coming out of the anesthesia, waking up.
Yeah. And that's where you have all kinds of expertise, because you've been a white male longer than you've been anything, longer than you've been a Christian, longer than you've been a dad, longer than you've been married, longer than you've been educated, you know, been a son because you're a white male. So you have some real authority in that. And people may, and if you talk about that, it's, you could say what I said. Well, this has been my experience. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but this has been my experience. People can say, no, Black people don't. I say, you know what? I might have said that. I might have thought that too the first time it happened. But since I've experienced that 4 times, I no longer believe that. This is what I think.
Yeah.
But the strength of my stance is, this is my lived experience. And that's what you get to lean into. And I think when Black and white people, again, there are other issues of race and separation in American history, but I think so much of it was built upon, ambled out on Black and white relations. I think it helped to shape, it helped to practice. It was sort of the cadaver that America learned to practice medicine on. I think to the extent that we begin to contemplate, but then model some of that deep work, could be a very powerful gift to folks, Brandon, because sort of like the reentry work that I do. We work with formerly incarcerated folks. We help with housing, employment. But, you know, my whole reentry program is run by 2 formerly incarcerated men, and they're brilliant. But as I'm working with them, because, you know, I'm the middle-class professional, I've got the degrees, I've created this organization. But when they're talking to me, they're voicing things that make me say, wait, was my father just a bad dad that didn't care about me? Or was he chewed up by being a sharecropper and being in prison?
Wow.
So I started hearing things about my father through the mouths of the men I'm supposedly serving. And they're saying things to me. And I think, is that what my father wanted to say to me? But he didn't have the language. He didn't have the freedom. He you know, in his generation, you didn't talk about these things. And so I'm being healed in that process. So when I talk to people who want to do cross-cultural work or reentry work, I always ask, so what do you stand to gain? Because if you think you only have something to give, leave these men alone because you're dangerous.
Wow.
I think that what makes race relations very powerful is white individuals understanding that unless I have very close and trusted Black friends, Black family, I don't hear the language that I need to hear to understand these systems, and vice versa. You say things that helps me to further humanize people who have been prey to the racist systems. We have 4 lakes that surround Madison, and they're all jacked up with algae and phosphorus. And so we try not to even swim that much and even eat the fish out of it. But growing up, like, this was just a fisher's haven because, you know, all this panfish, crappie, bass, bluegill. But these fish are sick due to no wrong of their own. The water is just so poor that every time these eggs are just laid there, I live right near a fish hatchery. In fact, I live off a fish hatchery road. They create these perfect little fish, these fry, but when they put them in the lake, they become sick because of all the stuff that's there. That's what racism is. It's not because white people are shit in the water. It's because white people are swimming in water that others have shit in. And the fact that they're filled with shit and feeling shitty and then oblivious to shit is what racism is. It's because it's been flowing through their gills and all around them, and they don't know why people don't want to eat them. They don't know why they're considered contaminated. I didn't do anything. You're right. Racism isn't what you do either. It's what's done to you. And I think that's been my stance. I haven't heard other people really talk about it that way. I feel like it's just kind of something that the Holy Spirit has awakened in me. But I think the more that's communicated, it will help people to lean in and begin to say, if I don't end racism for everyone, then my grandkids are going to swim in this water.
It's such a powerful metaphor. And you're giving me language for some things that I felt. I'm going to practice what you asked me to do as well. I'm going to speak as an expert. So here's my experience.
Yeah.
Being a white man living in largely white systems, is the conversation around race for white folk orients around the poles of guilt and penance.
Of course.
And nobody wants to feel guilt or penance, right? I mean, it's not pleasant.
Right.
And so the two reactions that I see is normally defensiveness of like, oh, come on, we're not having this conversation again, or I'm not racist or prejudiced. My ancestors didn't do that, or that becomes overt blame. Oh, you're playing the race card. It becomes kind of
Mhm.
defensiveness on steroids. What I'm hearing in this conversation is that's all a phantom game. That whole letting the conversation live in the guilt and penance realm is a sophisticated mechanism for avoidance. And what I
Yes.
think you're opening up and I'm hearing we're opening up is a totally different game, which is about trauma and healing.
Right.
It's coming out of trauma, and it's everybody healing through not living in the fantasy of guilt and penance, and driving the conversation down to a spiritual level of, no, but this is about our humanity. Everyone suffers if we're not united. Everyone suffers even if someone's not prejudiced, but they grow up in racist systems, and we obviously have the data to show that we live in racist
Right.
systems. Everybody suffers.
Right.
And so to me, and there's something deeply in our shared faith, Alex, there's something so deeply spiritual kingdom about this. There's something so
Of course.
deeply like we cannot be whole together. We cannot be whole unless we're whole together. And again, even this on a theological level, you think about American theology, it's so individualistic. I'm saved, I'm quote unquote going, I've prayed the prayer, I'm quote unquote going to heaven when I die. What other demands can be made on me? I've checked the box.
I do my quiet time.
I do my quiet time, right? And there's very little theological awareness. No, this is about God wanting to bring healing to trauma, and that you can't actually be fully saved unless we're saved together. That conversation is such a different invitation, I think, that can bypass the guilt, penance dynamic that I just see completely color, pardon the pun, the conversations
Yes.
around race that I've been around. There's guilt and penance lead to fear. I see so much fear about doing the wrong thing. Again, that's something I've so appreciated about you, is you're not interested in someone screws up, uses the wrong language. Like even Uncle John in the listening to a podcast you did with him where he called Asian folk Orientals, and I kind of cringed, like, oh, I know that
John dropped the
I
N
know.
word twice. I think I told him to edit it out. I said, do not, because don't do that to him.
Yeah, but I've never seen you go to the guilt and penance place, because it's like you intuit that's not helpful, and you never go to the. That's part of our cultural cachet, is to scapegoat people, to make them wrong for not knowing the right language, and how can you have conversation if you're always in fear of screwing up, right?
You can't.
Yeah, and so I really appreciate that you never go to that place. You gently, are with people and helping them out of some of their blind spots. But anyway, to me, this is such an invitation to a different way of having the conversation, and I think that will make a huge difference for white folk. Is like, hey, this isn't about making you wrong or making you guilty or making you pay. It's about calling you into your humanity. And Black folk have a lot to teach us about being human, because there's been a different suffering, and suffering is part of how we understand what it means to be human. So
And it's how we
anyway, really,
identify
really
with
helpful.
God.
What's that?
Yeah, I love what you're saying, Brent. And that's where you have expertise. That's where you have real power, because you can even say, okay, let's have this discussion. Like you said, you're getting this new language to think about what woke is, or anesthesia, and I'm getting these ideas about ways I want to talk about this even further. So again, I'm so grateful that we're capturing this. But there's something about brokenness and suffering that you're aware of that brings you to the cross, and the anesthesia that keeps white society asleep keeps it from accessing certain levels of God, which
Yeah.
is why I tell our church, look, I don't care what your ethnicity is, you need to be Black.
Wow.
Because Black is not about melanin, it's about being other.
Wow.
Blackness is a deviation from the norm of whiteness, of proper, of clean, of white driven pureness. It's the furthest extremity. And so unless you understand that Jesus came to be Black,
Yeah.
you don't even understand who God is.
Yeah.
And when people, like, I could see it particularly in the eyes of younger people, like our young adults, because these are people that are going to live in a more pluralistic world, and I need them to be more than woke. I need them to be awake. But the reason why society doesn't have a framework for this is because the church doesn't have a theology for it.
Yeah.
We are the influencers of society. We're the only entity that has been directed and empowered by the Holy Spirit to do God's work in the earth, not social services, not government. And we have no theology for this. What
Wow.
I heard from what you were saying about we can't be whole separately, it's like this old riddle I remember as a kid. How long does it take? Like, I think the riddle went something like this. There were three men from the utility company, and they dug a hole in the backyard, or the thing could even be grave diggers, but they dug a hole in 1 hour. So how long would it have taken them to dig a half a hole? So we're doing the math on it. Well, the trick question is there's no such thing as a half a hole. As soon as you put a shovel in the ground, it's a hole.
It's a hole. Yeah.
There's no such thing as a fragmented whole.
Yeah.
Either it's whole or it's not. And I know that's whole HOLE and whole WHOLE, but the point is there is trying to practice wholeness or wellness that's separated from the wholeness of the body is the antithesis of wholeness.
Yeah.
And so the church is fragmented because we're trying to individualistically be whole. We're trying to racially segregated world, denominationally segregated world, be whole when we're only a small portion of the total whole that's being dug. And so there's no way we can be it all by ourselves. Somewhere I got lost in that metaphor. But the point is there's no way you can't dig a half hole, and you can't be you alone, or you and your special sect can't be the entire either.
Yeah.
And we just gotta, this is why we lean into each other, because that's the only way we can get better together.
I fully resonate, and I'm thinking, what you said about the theology of Jesus was a black man is so,
or black, not even like a black man, but just Jesus being black.
Sorry, black. That's yeah.
No, I mean, I only say that because I don't want people to try to think I'm trying to play around with scripture.
Right. I know what you mean. It's a spiritual reality, not a genetic reality.
Yes.
That story, the emperor has no clothes, the king's naked. Yes. And it's a small child who says, wait a minute, but he's naked. I have had that experience increasingly with theology. It's like the David Foster Wallace story about the fish swimming in the water, and they don't know they're swimming in water, right? It's like,
right.
How our theology has no clothes, how our the water of our, and I'm talking about white theology, how white theology, number one, so individualistic that, again, I've prayed the prayer, I'm going to heaven, I'm not going to hell. It's almost laughable when you see what a reduction of what Jesus taught is. My friend Bill calls it the gospel Americana, right? This sort of cheap grace. But in addition to that, you mentioned the white iconography of Jesus. And I know a lot of people have written about this, but I remember how Howard Thurman, this 20th century black mystic, talked about it, that Jesus was a man with his back against the wall. And if you want to understand Jesus, you need to understand if you want to understand Jesus, you got to understand the black experience of having your back against the wall. Because in America, the closest corollary or an analogy to Jesus is black folk who Jesus was a poor Palestinian firebrand with his back against the wall. And that, I mean, all sorts of people, I know that all sorts of people have expressed that idea, but the way he said it helped me really think of, oh shoot, like I can't understand Jesus unless I understand what it means to have your back up against the wall. What it means to suffer, what it means to be against power systems that you have no physical way, but the only way to overcome are spiritual. And so again, as a white person who was immersed in white theology, there's a whole river and stream here for white folk that you cannot understand Jesus or the kingdom unless you understand these dynamics. And it's not only black folk who black people who can help us understand these dynamics, but it sure as hell ain't the white experience, the white experience in America of being at the top of the caste system.
Right.
It's such and I think that if it moves out of the conversation of guilt and penance and becomes a conversation about wholeness, justice, healing, togetherness, if there is a change from this guilt penance orientation to, no, this is a conversation about wholeness, healing, togetherness, what it means to be fully human. I know there's a lot of white folk who want to cross that bridge, but again, That's not how the bridge has been presented. It's either not been presented at all, or it's been presented as something that white folk need to feel defensive about.
Right.
So it's I love the invitational aspect and element of it.
Sure. Two things come to mind. One is this perspective that I'm sharing with you is not because I'm Black. I think it's because of revelation from the Spirit, but also I study white people.
Mm.
I listen, and I try to grapple with good people who swim in racist waters and who struggle as to whether or not that could really infest them, not just affect them, but infest them. Like you couldn't live near Chernobyl and not have fear that somehow radioactivity has infiltrated your body. And if people keep saying like, I've been infiltrated, I haven't been infiltrated, they miss the checkups that might catch some of the beginning growth of cancer. And I think white people are so afraid that there's nothing worse in the world than being racist, that they don't get the growth checked out, and then it just grows into something really ugly. But my perspective on this is not because I'm Black, it's because I'm observant. And I listen to white people, I read white people, I watch white people, I was discipled by white people, I was educated by white people. And so I want to make sure you hear that too, that a lot of these things come not because this is Black thought. My Black friends haven't thought about these things.
Interesting.
And they don't live into these things because they don't think that it's cool. They think I'm crazy to find relatives and connect with them. I was talking to my best friend the other day. He said, wait a minute, Alex, wait. Even Henry Louis Gates, he helps other people find their stuff, but you don't hear him talk about having a beer like with his white relatives. You were in New Orleans. Wait, Alex, you call them your cousins. Like, wait, and he's from in southern Indiana near Kentucky border. He said, wait, you didn't just say like, Alex, you said cousin. Like that means family, that means ownership, that means reunion, that means connection, that means love. Like you said, I don't know anybody. So he said, I'm going to watch that documentary. And I've said it to the church, but he never caught it. He was at my wedding, I was in his wedding. So this is not necessarily a Black way, because Black people don't necessarily agree with this because we understand the disparity, but I'm also a person of faith. And if I don't believe in redemption, then what do I believe in? Then what am I doing? Like I don't need Christ to raise hell. And so I'm doing this because I'm just watching, because I realize people are so busy protecting a label that they miss the opportunity to really wrestle with that diagnosis. They're so busy trying to state what they're not. I was raised by a single mom. It was me and her and my sister in my home. If I think I get a free pass, then I practice no misogyny because I was raised by a strong Black woman and I love my little sister. But yet, the first time Jackie told me that she didn't want to go to the auto mechanic or the dealership by herself, and I argued her down, like, men don't treat women different. This is the night we got married. This is the 1980s. And then I realized, Alex, you used to sell cars. Like one of your first jobs was selling. You know exactly what men say and think about women. Then I thought, where did that memory go? And why was it so important for me to convince her that this doesn't, like, who was I helping? Like, I was trying to convince her, or comments I made and thought, that shouldn't come from a man raised by a very strong and proud Black woman. But somehow in society, I see a woman who's a CEO of a major Fortune 500 company, and I don't say anything disparagingly, but I kind of go, okay, that's not Mattel and that's not Mary Kay. Like, that's Google. Okay, okay. Where did that thought come? That men are supposed to be smarter and stronger, and so I think when we're open to how we've been infiltrated, it'll help us. And the second thing that I think you and I could really drive home as we flesh this out is something that I really want to bring out when we put plans together to do the documentary, because I would love to get that going at some point. I became a Christian in the 70s with all of the thief in the night, the trumpet's gonna sound, will you be ready? Kind of rolling the casket of the deceased out of the way. Where will you be if Jesus comes back tonight? Almost all those people
have either lost their joy or no longer claim salvation because we thought fear would get people into the kingdom.
Yeah.
And so if the fear is not strong enough to get us into the kingdom, why do we think fear and guilt is strong enough to get us into reconciliation?
Wow. If fear is not enough to get us in the kingdom, why do we think fear and guilt is enough to get us into reconciliation and forgiveness? That
Right.
put that on the banner, the subtitle of the book.
Oh, man.
Why support Black Like Me podcast? There are very few places where Black activists and innovators can listen to and hear someone so aptly and culturally appropriately voice their concerns and dreams and aspirations and fears and illnesses and cultural commonalities. Equally, there are so few places where concerned non-Black thinkers and feelers, readers and watchers, lovers of culture, stalwarts of racial justice and harmony can go to learn, lean in, and to be a quiet fly on the wall in Black spaces and experience deep personal transformation through listening to honest Black people's truth. Black Like Me podcast is that for so many people in this nation and around the world. Now, while your financial support beginning at as little as $2 a month will get you access to pre-released information, updates, conversations, insights, and exclusive events, your support also affords us the opportunity to expand the quality and reach of our excellent programming in thoughtful and authentic ways to more and more people. And more importantly, white people need to stop trying to get free shit from Black people. All right, seriously, your financial support is a vote of confidence, and it's an enabler of vision and innovation. So why not click that link today and join the movement? I want to thank you in advance for your support and your partnership.
Yeah, your metaphors are so helpful. And I do think, we think about the kingdom. So the metaphor that so many people have been given for salvation is, here's your certificate, you're good now, you're going to go to heaven, as opposed to a dance or a banquet or a party. And the dance or the banquet and the party is getting to participate with God and seeing the world made whole. It's so different than the individualistic theology. I mean, and Jesus is saying this all the time, right? Many people are going to say to me on that day, Lord, we did all these things in your name. And he's going to say, I never knew you. And the people who were in the party are the people who were working for justice and wholeness and taking care of the weak. And it's like, that's the party, is being in together and being together in wholeness. And I think about how much is robbed from the human experience when, to your point, it's all, the theology is clustered around guilt and fear rather than being clustered around an invitation to participate in whole life and joy. It's like we forget about the Jesus who was accused of being a drunkard because he was at the party,
Right.
And we focus on the Jesus, the white Jesus of the stained glass window, where if you just look like a good boy, you're going to make it to heaven.
Very pristine and clean, yes.
So the theological ramifications here are so immense. And I get, and I find, when you said, this is not the Black experience, this is my experience by the Spirit, studying white people, I find that even myself, how I go to sides, like a white perspective, a Black perspective. I don't really do that in many places in my life where I see, I'm pretty nuanced, right? But I notice when I start having this conversation, I do go to sort of blocks of thought. And you always help me bring it back to a human conversation for you and for me, of like, no, be human here. Like, there's no one perspective on this. And I often do treat the race conversation differently, I think, because of the remnants of guilt and fear and the programming that I got around it that I participated in. And so it's an awakening. Wokeness can kind of become this word that people on the right or white folk fear, but the way you're talking about it, it's awakening into being fully alive. It's awakening to the party. Right. It's not about, having to have all the right answers. It's about letting yourself be human. And
You're right.
that is such a different invitation to the conversation for me than I've been used to.
Sure. I'm getting so many ahas here too, Brandon. I'm gonna stop. I want to even just like process some of these, but I think the last aha I have is connected to like where we first started, how cousin John was just sort of saying, I get it, I'm woke. My family's not quite there yet, but it individualizes the process. That if you're really woke, if I'm awake in a house and it's on fire, and I'm not able to wake others up to get to safety, how woke was I really?
Interesting. Yeah.
Because my alertness should protect someone else. And so, but again, I think it's that rugged Western individualism. Like
Totally.
which is really saying, I know about history. I heard about the 1619 Project. I voted for Obama the second time. I didn't vote for Trump the second time. I'm okay. I'm not one of the white people. When white people are white people, it's almost like when someone visits our church and we have sort of the meet and greet, and they say, yeah, I visited a lot of churches and I just didn't feel the Holy Spirit in them, but I really feel like the Holy Spirit is here. And I started thinking, all right, how many more Sundays is it going to take until the gospel steps on your toes? And you're going to be sitting at somebody else's ham salad little spread saying, and then I went to this black-led multi-ethnic church and the Holy Ghost wasn't there either. It's like they're trying to convince me that you're worthy. I see the Spirit here. And I'm thinking, okay, don't follow with that person. Do not let them be a part of this church because they are hell raisers. I can tell right now.
Totally.
And
as
so,
as a former fellow pastor, I can fully verify that.
I think you're just like, okay, how long is this going to last? And so I think we have to help white people to really to rethink what it means to be woke. And if it's in an individualized or an individualistic sense that because I'm better than the others because I get it. I make sure I capitalize the B in Black, and I read Malcolm X again, and we do all of these things. After a history class, there's a white parent, and he said he took his daughters to the lynching museum in Alabama. I said, well, have you taken them to Kwanzaa celebrations? Have you taken them to the Smithsonian in DC? Like, no, don't traumatize them babies by taking them to lynching museums. That's not all it means to be Black. But in being woke, he wants to, and he meant well. And I laugh because I'm a bit incredulous, but he was sharing it with me because he wanted to show me that he is so woke that he is exposing his daughter. As a white woke man, I'm making sure my daughters know their history. Well, are you reading about the great kings and queens of Africa? Are you talking about the great inventions? Do your babies know that there were 2,000 elected Black people at the turn of the last century in American politics? Don't take your babies to some dungeons and let them see the whipping scene, of LeVar Burton in Roots and say, that's history. But in being woke, he didn't think about how that was traumatizing his daughters. He was trying to alleviate his own guilt that I see it. I'm going to make sure they see what I see. And we got to help it come out of that individualistic kind of thing. And how does it help you? If you're woke, who you're helping? Because that's the proof of your alertness, that you're helping others, not that you're disdaining others. And then he told me, well, then tell me what I should read. Tell me where I should go. It's like, as a parent, like what parent? I might ask you for a good orthodontist. I might ask you, my daughter's spine is kind of curved, and I noticed your daughter was wearing a brace. Like, where do you go? But not like, hey, Brandon, can you just do some research on like disciplining, or how do you talk to your child about swearing or not telling the truth? Like, where in parenthood do you get to just tell somebody, yeah, just make me a list of stuff and just create a spreadsheet and send it to me? How do dads talk to their daughters about menstruation? Yeah, do a little research and send it. It was like part of a parent. You go find. You went and adopted them, girl. You go to the library and read some book. That's not my job. I'm trying to raise my Black daughter too. Man, to be related and to both be pastors and a part of the Christian faith, like, could the Lord be up to something? But I just think that there's so many hungry and eager and kind-hearted white pastors who are clueless.
I think that's right. Yeah.
And they don't even know how to reach into the theological bag. Like they're trying to do it through guilt and fear and don't even understand. Dude, what I'm talking about is just this. Like there's neither Jew nor Greek bond nor free male. Like I'm just talking about like what's Jesus' whole idea. Like because I'm Black, it will always be perceived as sort of a Black perspective, a Black theology. Jesus being Black is not a Black theology as much as it is taking a very human framework of Blackness and explaining that that's the banner that God decided to roll under and come into that, so that no one would be beneath God. Like to go to that extreme, so that no one would feel the gospel between God, was beneath them. So I'm even willing to love the most ostracized people. In addition to being poor and Middle East and all these things, he was an enemy of the state and a refugee. Like, so we can learn a lot about God by leaning into the refugee community as well. I mean, his family, had to flee to Egypt. But I think reminding people, this is what's making the gospel relevant. If we can address real issues that society is just like, the head of a major newspaper is like, tell me what to do. The governor doesn't know. The mayor doesn't know. The county executive comes to our church occasionally. They'll come to my office like, but he's adopted a Black daughter. How we said, Joe, stop talking about this from your head. Your daughter's Black. Tell them this is how I feel of a father of a Black woman when you say this. Don't quote me. Speak your own heart, man. He never thought that he could bring that in because he thought, well, I don't have the expertise. You're the only man in the room that's white has got a Black daughter. You're the expert in that
You
area.
are the expert on this.
You are the expert, buddy. Executive.
It's so humanizing. It's humanizing.
And I think that this is going to be part of the revival, Brandon. I really believe it. I think human sexuality and stuff is going to be a really big issue or fight, but it is not as deeply grounded and separating and economically influenced as this whole race.
I think that's exactly right. And the invitation here is so kingdom, as Jesus talked about it, that once you start having the conversation, it feels like substance again and getting out of the theological fluff. I mean, I love what you said about the ego too, that like in our workshops, we always talk about the ego has, look good and be right. That's the ego's game. And so the idea of wokeness can be driven by the ego is so true. And then what happens is on the right, people critique that idea. They call out the hypocrisy of it, and rightly so. Oh, they sense, oh, you're woke, but it's really about your ego. This isn't actually heart-centered. This isn't about actually bringing change. But then they use that as an excuse to stop to not go any deeper in the conversation, right? So people are just looking for the first exit ramp out of the conversation. That as soon as they smell hypocrisy, they give it a pass to let themselves off. And there has to be a bigger invitation, like a bigger highway, so that these exit ramps can't be so easily taken, right? Not to force anybody into the conversation, but for our own collective good. So again, the word invitation to me just rings out of this. And I think you're exactly right, is if the church doesn't address this, the irrelevance of the church will be so pronounced that not only will you have to have a revival, you have to have a full reformation.
Wow, Brandon. And let me tell you this. There's a local church that just closed down, and some of the members have been coming to our church. One family is Russian. Other family is white. The wife went to seminary. Now the pastors are attending. None of these people are Black. And so Jackie kind of jokingly says, Alex, our church is getting predominantly white. we're crossing that halfway mark. And then of course you see it on the stage. Our musician, and he's like an R&B band, and our music director, who I've known for like 20 years, married him, dedicated his children, professional musician. He's like, Alex, Mitch is the baddest he's the baddest musician, Black gospel musician in the city of Madison, probably Madison and Milwaukee. He's a 26-year-old young white kid, looks so unassuming, but he's got music stuff on YouTube with 1 million listens or shares or what have you. So when you walk in, you see it on the stage and stuff, but part of this is white people are getting liberated. Like what we talked about earlier, they're realizing that Black history has something to say to them because they now understand I'm not African-American, but I'm Black. Oh, that's the point I was making, that understanding Blackness helps you to understand your own Blackness and otherness. Because I love that Thurman says you got to get to know Black people. What I'm finding is abuse, fatherlessness, rape, incest, shame are really rampant in the white community. And so as they get in places where Black people are talking about it, at some point they say, oh shit, me too.
Yep.
And so I think the beauty of being attracted to Blackness is it helps us to understand we are all Black, that those who are unredeemed are not redeemed because they're unlovable, because they are unblackable. They refuse to be Black. And so the whole idea is, I hardly know white friends who aren't in therapy. Like they're always talking about, like Black people are like, ooh, she's in therapy. Like it's just becoming okay to be in therapy when you're Black. Pastors used to do it, or if you're in a 12-step, that's your therapy. It's just not becoming okay for Black people to be in therapy. If white people are in therapy, they're Black.
Then I'm very Black, my friend.
Yes.
I'm Black 2 times over.
No, gotcha. So, but I'm saying, but that then, because God doesn't want you in the cheap seats, just saying, okay, Alex, okay, now I want to fetishize. I love that word, but I can't say it. Fetishize your Blackness. No, I'm like John the Baptist saying, cuz, come in the water. You Black too.
Oh my gosh.
Come in the water. Because this God who gets me, gets you in all your brokenness. And if we're going to see a revival in the broader white church, there's got to be some pain that makes us say Jesus and mean it. Not like, oh, like you go to a service and they fanning these Black sisters and they're like, Lord, Jesus. You know, like my sister's got breast cancer, and sometimes she'll come to church and just lay out in the floor.
Yep.
And they just kind of go get the cloth so that her dress doesn't come up. And then the prayer ladies kind of get around. They're like, listen, she's holding on to her faith. She's fighting to her faith. This is what you do at church. Like some of it, she's going to go do it with an oncological therapist, but then some of it, she's going to do it with an oncological God. So she's going to come to church. And so, but if people just think that that's just a Black thing, because people are sitting there and they're hurting too, when they learn to get in the floor, whatever that means, then the invitation, come on, if the way to get to God, to be unified with God, is to come through the way of a broken Christ, a way of Blackness. And so I'm trying to encourage my white believers, but particularly you as my white friend and cousin, come into the water, that this isn't just, I told people, God does not love Black people because we're African-American. He loves us because we're broken. He is not attracted to our melanin. He's attracted to our pain. And if this is the gift that we give, which is why white people love our food and our music and our acting, soul food, sweat, that's all rooted in pain. We take our pain everywhere, and it spices up our food, our dress, our swag, how we dance in the end zone, because all of that came from not expressing, like what you said about trauma. We're trying to work that shit out. So we take it even in our praise, we're working out trauma. That's why we loud. Like, I ain't gonna be loud. Like, be quiet and shit. Be quiet on the bus. I'm trying to work some shit out. I ain't gonna shut up, because I'm a little crazy if I shut up. If white people learn that from Black people, they will experience the kind of revival and kind of church that's been powerful for the last 400 years for us.
Not only that, we've been quiet for a long time trying to sneak around. Not buying nobody.
Yeah, my wife just came and Jackie just said, and we've been sneaking around trying to be quiet. Quiet don't work for Black people because we're trying to work this trauma out. And what's the Western way? Shh, quiet. Don't rock the boat. Black people are like, hell no. You're gonna bring me some more shrimp up in here. This shit is burnt. You're gonna bring now some of that is rude. But the point is, I want family and friends to own their Blackness and come in this water together, because then you get to experience a Jesus you haven't really experienced.
I'm intentionally being silent because I don't want to I'm awash in the words. I feel what you've just said for the last few minutes in my body. I mean, I'm serious. I feel my body resonating with what you're saying. And it's true. It's I have an inner knowing of everything you've just said. I know it's reality. And I know it's an invitation of the Spirit. You know, it's not like I'm a prophet, but I know when there's an invitation of the Spirit. I recognize it in my body, and I feel it, not in my head, but I feel it in my body, in my gut.
Yeah.
The
That's
the
what
truth of
prophets
what you
do,
said.
by the way, Brandon. That's what prophets
Hmm.
do.
Whew.
Man, listen, on that note, I've also learned when we have to just learn to sit with stuff. But Brandon, man, the more I talk to you, the more I love you and realize we're family for a reason. And I'm just really glad that we're leaning in and we're voicing stuff that if our parents and grandparents and great parents and great grandparents could have talked about, this world would be different.
Yes.
But perhaps if we continue talking about it, it'll be different for our grandkids.
I'm in for that. I'm all in for that.
Yeah.
And I want
And I
to
keep
do
thinking,
the work.
yes, and I do too, because I'm not whole if you're not.
There it is.
And that's not a Black perspective. That's a kingdom
That's
perspective.
a human perspective. Yeah.
That's very, and we can talk about all this world of differentness, but we both are descendants of the loins of the same person. Like, I'm like, it's not just like, okay, our great grandfathers were brothers. Like, we both came out of the same body, out of the
Yes.
same individual. And man, if there's no theological correlation to that, it's really amazing. So anyway, I want you to keep processing. I don't want to keep over talking, but this is one of the richest conversations I've had in a long time,
Me too.
and I'm just excited about where it could go. But right now, I actually want to go and just sit. I want to
Yeah.
go and just process this. But man, thank you for reaching out and for us both being sensitive to move the interview to next week, because we needed this conversation.
Absolutely. And this is, my love for you has deepened. You helped me be more human. Could not be more grateful for you. And I agree. There's something here that is certainly bigger than us. Something of the
Yeah.
Spirit, something the Spirit's wanting to do. I feel that. And yeah, so I'm grateful for you. Thank you for this time.
Yeah, thank you.
What powerful interview. I think Brandon and I took our relationship to a much deeper level during this conversation. And some things came up that I probably have never stated before. Some things certainly came up that he's never heard before. And we processed some things in a way that neither of us have ever done before. And what's really unique is that this is not just the G Cook story. I mean, Brandon's a G also. So this is not the G story. Our families and the makeup of our families is really a part of American history and American culture. So I want you to think that this is more of the rule than you probably have imagined. So as you process this and as you share this information and as you lean into it, I want you to know we've got a lot of work to do in race relations. And part of it is even understanding our heritage and our roots. You know, one of the things that gives me hope in race relations, particularly Black and white race relations, is when we can look back honestly together and understand history as it's had an impact on both of our communities. And this is part of what Brandon and I do. I'm not trying to make Brandon feel guilty for waking up one day and finding out that he's a descendant of a slave owner. Hell, I'm a descendant of a slave owner and a slave. Imagine living with that. But the interesting thing is that this truth that Blacks and whites are more related than we think in this country is pretty amazing. And so in order to dismantle all of this crap, we've got to understand it. And that's part of what Brandon and I are doing. Because we're family and because we share faith that makes us believe that we need to fight against all of this ugliness in order to model love and understanding and restitution and restoration, we get to lean in together. But what's your motivation? What makes you want to do better in terms of race relations? Understanding it, addressing it, dismantling it, making sure that you're not training your kids in it, making sure that it's not killing your kids. Dodging this stuff and living above this stuff can really be a full-time job. And for many Black people, it is. So you might want to listen to this 2-part series again. You certainly want to share it. And you want to ask yourself, how aware were you of these truths and how they have shaped the American reality? and how it has shaped America's role in the world and what has fueled it. And when we talk about just getting along, have we understood the true cost of that and what that might look like? So listen, we put this podcast together. I put this out because I want to change the way people think, because if they change the way they think, they will change the way they act and live and interact with others. So I'm hoping that this is a step in that direction for you. So do your part. Share this, talk about it, write a comment, write a review, repost it, share it with your faith leaders, your bosses, play it in the workplace, but give this some traction, because this is a conversation that you're not going to hear everywhere, because it's taking a lot of research and a lot of time and a lot of death and a lot of missed opportunities to make this happen. Click the link to become one of my Patreon supporters to help us to continue to do this great work. And let your friends know that this podcast exists and it might be just something that they're looking for. I know that you're going to be a part of the change that you want to see, and we've given you the resources to help you do that to some degree. So we hope that you take advantage of it. We want you to have a great day, and thank you so much for listening and for being a part of Black Like Me.
Black like me. Black like me.
Wow, I really enjoyed today's conversation, and I know that you did too. You know, with each episode, I challenge my listeners to do a number of things: to lean in, to learn, to reflect, to share, to donate, but more importantly, to act on what has inspired you in today's episode. You know, the benefit of being around for 8 seasons is that people constantly stop me and tell me how much they love the show, and they even give me ideas and suggestions about Black icebreakers. But you know, I couldn't have pulled this off alone. So let me take a moment so that I can acknowledge and thank my crew. Engineers and producers, Jeremy and Eli. Also a member of my creative team is Jakesha. The music was produced by Corey Saffold, and Marcus Fleming is on vocals. And of course, you, our Patreon supporters, and all of our listeners, thank you. To everyone who listens to this podcast and you decide to share it with someone who needs it, to everyone who listens and then reposts it on your own social media accounts, to everyone who hears something that moves them to act differently, act better, and to everyone who leans in to understand Black life more honestly, thank you.
Black like me.